Hey everybody, it's Meredith Miller, integration coach and author. Today I wanted to bring you a message about two of our human needs that sometimes we overlook and don't really think about. Often we think about Maslow's hierarchy, food, clothing, shelter as the basic human needs. And those might have to do with this physical reality, but we are not just physical beings. We are also emotional beings. We are mental beings. We are spiritual beings having this human experience. Two of our very important needs that aren't physical are attachment and authenticity. Dr. Gabor Mate did a phenomenal video. He has loads of amazing videos on the internet, by the way, but there's one in particular that will really touch you if you have identified with being a people pleaser all your life. Okay, if you are a recovering codependent and you realize you have spent a lifetime until this point trying to make other people feel good, compromising yourself to take care of other people, constantly putting other people's needs first, you definitely want to listen to that video. It's called When the Body Says No. And it'll really blow your mind. But one really awesome thing that he said in there was that, we have this need for attachment and authenticity. And Dr. Gabor Mate says, we need attachment and authenticity, but what happens if you have to give up your authentic self in order to remain in attachment? So if you think about that, when you're going back to childhood and you think about how much of yourself you had to give up in order to remain in attachment with that family dysfunctional dynamic that was going on, whether your parent was an alcoholic or an addict or a narcissist or other emotional manipulator or abusive person, you learned that you had to stuff your feelings. You learned you had to stuff your emotions. You didn't have a right to express a lot of that. You didn't have a right to express a lot of what you desired and what you wanted to do because you were probably forced to be, in this particular mold that they wanted you to fulfill for them. Last week, I also heard Trent Shelton talk at the Growth Summit, and he said something similar. He said, "We are quick to trade in our identity for approval. Why do we care about the opinions of people who don't care about us?" And it's so true when you think about it, right? So if you find yourself in these patterns of people pleasing, essentially what that is looking for others for approval, looking toward others for approval. And it's something that you probably learned in childhood. And it's something that you learned was a survival strategy, that if you didn't get approval from the abusive person in your life, you were in trouble. You were going to get punished, or you were going to be neglected. You were going to get abused in some way. So you gave up parts of yourself in order to remain connected. So it's important now to recognize you want to stop attaching yourself to people and things and situations that hurt you. So ask yourself right now, where in your life do you need to let go of an attachment because you're sacrificing entirely too much of yourself to maintain that attachment? Where in your life do you want to let go of one of those attachments? Is it a person in your life that you recognize, like, you just can't be yourself around that person? Stop hanging out around people like that, because the more you compromise yourself, the more you compromise your integrity, the more you compromise your authenticity, your self-respect and your self-esteem plummets. So if you want to have self-esteem, you want to have a healthy sense of self-esteem, you want to have a healthy sense of self-respect, you got to say no to those people who aren't doing you good. You got to say no to the people who aren't listening to you. You got to say no to the people where you feel like you have to be someone else just to be accepted and welcomed into their life. And so many times we catch ourselves sacrificing our authenticity just to maintain that attachment. So when you recognize that that attachment is a big part of your inner child wound, and you might notice that you are like impulsively attaching yourself to people who are going to give you disapproval, or to people who you have to work for their approval, or to people who you just can't be yourself around because they live in an entirely different realm, and maybe they're not even bad people or negative people. It just might be that they're so different than you, and their beliefs and their values about who they are and about life in general are so different than you that it's like maybe you're a spiritual person and you're hanging out with some people who just aren't spiritual, and you find yourself just feeling Like you can't really be yourself. Like you can't share this whole big part of who you are when you're hanging out with these people. You feel like you dim your light just to maintain in contact. That's not a good situation. I feel like it's a lot better to spend time alone and work on your authenticity, work on being your truest self, work on eradicating everything from your life that isn't in alignment with your authentic self, whether it's your behaviors and habits, the actions you take, the choices you make. Maybe it's your feelings that you have about yourself, those old tapes that are playing from some abusive person in your past. Maybe it's like these emotional states that you keep going into and you're like, man, why do I feel like this? I don't want to feel like this. I don't normally feel like this. And then you recognize it's because when you're hanging out with a certain person or you're doing a certain activity with certain people, you feel like crap afterwards. You really got to listen to that and honor your authenticity first and foremost. That is a big part of self-care. That will lead you in the direction of self-love, because how are you going to love yourself if you're hanging out with people who don't love you? It's just going to remind you that you're not worthy of love, which isn't true at all, but it's something that you learned in childhood. So recognize where in your life you're giving up your authenticity in order to remain in attachment, and choose your authenticity. Spend time working on yourself, working on your personal development, working on your self-healing, working on becoming the truest version of who you are. And if you don't know who you are, maybe you want to take a minute or 5 or 10 and think about 3 adjectives that describe your ideal self, like who you are when you are showing up with 100%, who you want to be, right? What are those 3 words? What are those 3 adjectives that describe you? So take some time and write those out and remind yourself, this is who you are. Remind yourself when you're in situations where you feel anything less than those 3 adjectives, what's wrong? Why aren't you showing up with 100% of who you are? Is it your attitude? Do you need an attitude adjustment? Okay, give yourself the attitude adjustment. But if you recognize that it's because of these attachments, these unhealthy attachments with people who don't care about you, with people with whom you have to sacrifice your authenticity, then you might want to take some new actions. So I am sending you all a big hug, and I will see you soon.